Hi, my name is Joe DiBartolomeo. I'm an Oregon injury lawyer. I have offices in Hillsboro and Astoria, Oregon. And in today's video, I want to talk about Oregon injury claims and pre-existing conditions. And the reason I'm making this video is that I spoke with a client just today who has pre-existing arthritis in her neck. And she wanted to know how that affected her claim. She had been injured in an auto collision, a pretty bad one, and she wanted to know how that affected her claim and whether that could be held against her. And that's a very good question, so I figured I would make this video so that you can understand how pre-existing conditions work when you make an Oregon injury claim. So let's get into this, and I'll start out with a little bit of an introduction about what I mean by pre-existing conditions, and what kind of claims you can make in an injury case, at least in the state of Oregon. And then we'll talk about the role of pre-existing conditions and how they affect your claim and could affect the outcome of a claim. So let's get started. So before we get into the pre-existing condition, let's talk a little bit about what you're able to claim, regardless of whether you have a pre-existing condition, when you're involved in a collision, or if you're injured on somebody else's property, or you have any kind of personal injury claim in Oregon. So if you prove fault, and I have other videos on that, and I also have an injury guide that you can download, and I will leave a link below. It's free, it doesn't cost anything, and I'll leave a link below in the YouTube version, and you can find it up top on my webpage if you're looking at this on that. So if you have an injury claim, and you are able to prove fault or liability, the next part of the claim that you have to prove are your damages, or is your damages. So there are two different kinds of damages, or two different kinds of compensation you can claim. One is called economic, that is medical expenses and or lost income. And the other one is called non-economic damages. And when I confer with clients, I always tell them that in my world, or the way I would describe it, is non-economic damages are damages or is compensation for the loss of your health. And often people hear the term pain and suffering and mental anguish. Those are two aspects of non-economic damage, but it's not just those two things. It's, again, compensation for the loss of your health. Now, the major factors among many that go into determining the extent of your non-economic damage claim has to do with the type of injury you suffered, what kind of medical care was required, how severe was the injury, but also whether the injury is going to cause you any kind of permanent impairment. If it's a life-changing injury that will cause you to change the way you do things, or it may be an injury that puts you at risk for further problems down the road, which we see often when our clients suffer severe joint injuries of the knee, the ankle, the shoulder, and the neck. So that's what you're claiming when you make an injury claim. So in the next part of this video, I'm going to talk about how pre-existing conditions get into the mix and how they're handled in the injury claim. Okay, so one of the things that I've learned, and I've been doing this for about 30 years, is the people who are injured the most severely, regardless of the cause of injury, it could be a car collision, it could be a bad fall, it could be any kind of injury. The people who have the hardest time are the folks who have some kind of pre-existing condition. Now, we all kind of hear that term. It's batted back and forth, especially when we talk about healthcare issues in our political arenas and what's covered and what's not in health plans. But when I talk about pre-existing conditions, I'm talking about a condition that you had prior to your injury event. So we'll use a car collision because that's a fairly common situation that we deal with in our office. So a common pre-existing condition would be somebody who has some pre-existing degenerative disc and joint disease in their cervical spine, their neck. And basically what we see, and you may not even know that you have it, but we'll see somebody, maybe they're of a certain age, they are injured in a collision, they suffer neck pain, they go to the doctor takes an x-ray, and lo and behold, there are degenerative changes in the neck, like the discs, which are the little pads in between each neck bone, are dehydrated, or the bones, the backbones, the neck bones, there may be some bone spurs. The fancy word for that is osteophytes that have developed. And a lot of us have these conditions and we don't even know it because there are no symptoms. It's just a gradual feature of the aging process. Now, some of us may have these pre-existing conditions, and it's no surprise to us because we may have had some bout of neck pain. We may have even been in a car wreck in the past, or we may have suffered some other injury, or we may have had some old sports injury and we have to go to the chiropractor once in a while to get things straightened out so we can go about our everyday life. Either way, those are pre-existing conditions. So that's what they are. Now, let's talk about how the law treats pre-existing conditions. If you were to look at the jury instructions that a jury would get on an injury claim, or if you were on a jury and you heard an injury claim, one of the instructions that you may get is what we call the pre-existing condition instruction. Now, a jury instruction is the judge explaining the law and how it should be applied in an injury case. And basically, without reading the instruction to you, if the case involves a pre-existing condition, the judge will read an instruction that says something like this. If you find that the plaintiff has a pre-existing condition and that the injury worsened that pre-existing condition, or that pre-existing condition made the plaintiff, and by the way, the plaintiff is the injured person pursuing the claim. If you find that this plaintiff or this person making the claim is worse off because they had a pre-existing condition and it was aggravated, then you are to consider all of that in fixing or coming up with the amount of proper compensation. So here's the shorthand version of that. You are not to be punished if you have a pre-existing condition, and because of that, you have a less than good outcome or a worse outcome than somebody who doesn't or didn't have a pre-existing condition. And here's how I describe it. Let's say that you are an elderly person with osteoporosis and you are crossing the street in a crosswalk, minding your own business, and somebody's driving down the street and they're looking at their phone and they don't see you and they hit you. But they brake right before and it's a really low speed collision. And because you're 80 years old and because you have osteoporosis, you break your hip. That's a bad result. Now, what an insurance company cannot do, or what an insurance defense attorney cannot do, is stand up in a courtroom and look at the jury and say, look, if plaintiff Mrs. Smith were 50 years old or 40 years old or 30 years old, she would not have had this osteoporosis, and she probably would have only suffered a bad bruise or a strain injury, and therefore you can't really punish my client because the plaintiff had some kind of arthritis. That's not allowed. You take the plaintiff as you find her. And so if you are more susceptible to injury and you suffer worse injury than maybe somebody else would have, you're not punished for being you. It's not fair. So that's how pre-existing conditions are accounted for in the Oregon injury claim. Now, what some defense attorneys and insurance companies might look at is whether that pre-existing condition was causing you a problem before the injury event. So we'll take our pedestrian who is struck by a car. Now, if we have a person who is treating for chronic hip pain because of osteoporosis, or if they had chronic arthritis in their hip and they were getting injections or actively treating for that, well, that's a different story, because then that will be relevant to figure out or determine where, let me put my glasses down because I'm going to use my hands, where you were before and after the injury. Now I'm looking at this video screen and I might be backwards on this, but this may be your health before your injury occurred, and this may represent your health after your injury occurred. Now, what a jury is doing is they're looking at where's the loss here? What is the difference in the health before and after? Now, somebody with a pre-existing condition may not be suffering any symptoms, and that difference in health will be significant. Somebody may have a pre-existing condition with ongoing issues and limitations and medical care, and it may be that some of that discomfort was already there beforehand, and so the comparison may not be what it was. It really depends on the specific facts of each case, which brings me to my next point. The way that we handle these in an injury claim is we look at the evidence. We look at what the facts of the case are. So we may talk to friends or family members, or obviously our client, about their activity level. We look at pre-injury medical records to see whether our client was even treating for this problem. We look at what the imaging studies or other medical record evidence show after the injury, because there may be some pre-existing arthritis, but there also may be some evidence of an acute injury like a fracture or damage to the joint. We obviously, or maybe not so obviously, will look at what the treating doctor has to say, or an expert witness, an expert medical witness, about whether there's evidence of some actual worsening of that joint after the injury event occurred, or whether there was an aggravation of the pre-existing condition. And again, we're going to look at what is the resulting injury, what kind of medical care was required, is there permanent impairment involved? If so, how much? So there are a lot of issues that are swirling around with a pre-existing condition, but here's the thing to keep in mind. A pre-existing condition, and this is going to sound a little bit strange, but I'll do my best to explain it in an artful way. A pre-existing condition, it actually can work to your advantage, improving the losses and the harms that you suffer, because if you require more care, or if you require more extensive care, it's going to be explained by the fact that you had some kind of pre-existing issue. And it might help a jury or an insurance adjuster or a mediator or an arbitrator, whoever your audience is, understand why things are worse for you than they may have been if you have been injured, if you had been injured in this accident 20 or 30 years ago. And I can say that because I'm an older person. So that is how pre-existing conditions work. They're definitely a significant factor in any claim when they exist. And if you have other questions about pre-existing conditions or injury claims in general, contact us. The contact icon on the website, if that's where you're looking at this video, is up above. If you're looking at this video on YouTube, I'll put a link down below. You can also check out our injury guide. We have a personal injury guide. It's free. You can download it. I will leave links for that as well. Contact us with questions if you have them. If we cannot help you, we will find somebody who can, or at the very least give you other options where you can go. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope it was helpful. Take care.